This is the OM System 150 to 600mm lens. How good is this lens for wildlife photography? Well, that's what I'm hoping to find out in this video. My name is Wayne Robertson and I'm a landscape and wildlife photographer based in Scotland. I've had this lens now for about 3 days, but this is the first opportunity I've had to come out and try it out, try to do some wildlife photography with it. The weather has been terrible the last few days. There's been really heavy rain, really strong winds, and although it probably looked quite nice earlier in the video, the weather is changing again. It's been terrible all morning until that clip, the few clips that I've filmed so far. Very overcast, pouring rain. It got bright, it looked like things were picking up, but now it's getting very grey, very overcast again. And there's sleet forecast for later today, so I'm not sure I'm going to get any fantastic shots or indeed see a lot of wildlife today, but I'm going to do my best. Now I have this lens for probably another week and a half. It's not my lens. OM System got in touch with me and they said, would you like to try out some gear? And I said this is a lens that I would be interested in trying out. So regardless of what I get today, you will see in this video lots of images, and I'm going to make sure I give it a really good test because I'll be out over the next week and a half with it, as much as is possible based on my schedule. And I'm going to give you my opinions and what I think of it as a lens for doing wildlife photography. I do own, as some of you may be aware if you've watched some of my other videos, the OM System 150 to 400mm lens. So what I don't want to do in this video is do a comparison. They're very different price points. This is a variable aperture lens. My other lens, excuse me, can be a constant f4.5 throughout the focal length range. So yeah, there's a big price difference and so on. So I definitely don't want to compare the lenses as such directly, but I think it's inevitable that in some way throughout the video I will refer to that other lens. But yeah, let's head on, and I want to talk a bit about the lens and see if I can find any wildlife. So I'm not having much luck with the weather and light today so far. It's been very poor the last few days. I've spent the last 40 minutes sheltering from some light rain. It's incredibly dark and overcast, and the forecast was meant to be bright and sunny, turning to sleet and snow much later in the day when I would be gone. And it is a cold day, but yeah, it's not nowhere near as bright as I thought it was going to be based on the forecast, but we can't help that. I'd like to talk a little bit about this lens. I've already walked a long distance carrying it on the strap, so I want to see how that's felt. And I have been testing it just on some birds and so on that's been flying by or going about in the water and so on. I've not really taken any images that I want to put in the video because it's purely been testing and the light has been terrible. But I've got a few things I'd like to talk about. And I'll go over some of the specs of the lens, but just be aware all this information is on the OM System website, so I don't want to spend too long going over that. But this lens offers a tremendous focal length range, 150 to 600 millimeters, and that would be the main draw for me. All of that focal length range, all the way up to 600 millimeters without using teleconverters, I think is fantastic. You can use teleconverters on this lens. However, for me personally and my photography, wildlife photography, how I've done it over the years, I think this would be enough focal length for me, 600 millimeters. But you can use teleconverters if you so wish. I'll put the exact weight of the lens up on the screen. It's just a hair over 2 kilograms. Some may argue that's heavy for a Micro Four Thirds system lens. But with this focal length range and a lens that seems to be well built, I think that's fair, to be honest. I could personally get on okay using this. I expect, you know, really long focal length lenses to be a bit heavier, and yeah, I think I could get on with it okay. I've walked a long way so far with it on this strap. I've not had any problem. I don't feel fatigued or sore in any way. The tripod foot here is Arca Swiss and it is quite short, but I've been quite surprised. I've actually found it incredibly comfortable to hold and it doesn't dig into my hand or anything. The edges are very well rounded, so it's really comfortable. And what I like is it's so easy to access the zoom ring and the manual focus ring. I can just turn it with my thumb. It's incredibly smooth. And this zoom ring operates very smoothly as well. I'll talk a bit more about that in just a second. But it's really nice to hold. This is well rounded, very comfortable. So yeah, I really like how the lens feels in my hands. I'll quickly go over some of the switches and buttons that are on this lens, but do keep in mind that you can find out more information and study this in a bit more depth in the OM System website. So I've got a focus limiter switch at the top, then a switch for going between autofocus and manual focus, and we've got a switch at the bottom here for turning image stabilization on or off. Around the barrel of the lens are 3 function buttons, so you can go into the camera's menu and assign a particular function of your choosing to those buttons. Each button does the same thing, so you can't assign 3 separate functions. It's one function and then you press any of those buttons and it'll do what you want. I believe they're positioned quite nicely, so whether you're using the camera in landscape or portrait orientation, you should be able to access one of those buttons quite easily. So around the other side of the lens, we've got another switch here, and it's got 3 positions, S, T and L. L stands for lock. So if you put the focal length to 150 millimeters, the L locks the lens so you couldn't actually extend the barrel. If you set it to S, that is for standard, so there's a standard amount of tension when you turn the zoom ring, and it does feel very smooth. If you put it to T, I'm guessing that stands for tight, and there's more restriction when you turn the zoom ring. Now, based on my experience so far with the lens, I have found that if you have it set to the S setting, standard, and you walk around and you hold the lens this way, the lens will extend. However, if you put it on the T for tight, that doesn't happen. And you can obviously lock the lens as well. On the lens, we have these eyelets here for attaching a strap, so that's very important. You obviously put the strap onto the lens rather than your camera body when it's a slightly heavier lens such as this. But yeah, so far, first impressions, well built, lots of nice features, and as I explained, I really quite like the tripod foot here, and it just makes the lens easy to hold and easy to access the zoom ring, the manual focus, and these switches and buttons as well. As you can see, it's another day. I gave up on photography on that earlier section in this video. Video always makes things look better than it truly is, but believe you me, it was incredibly dull, incredibly overcast, dreary, bleak. It was not a good day for testing a lens. So I'm back out again today. I'm at the coast. The first light of the day is just hitting the land, and I'll explain in a minute what I'm out to do today. But I wanted to talk briefly about the shot of the little grebe that I took on location in the earlier section of this video. I took it for a number of reasons, and I was thinking when I was taking it, it's a very good scene to explain where I think this lens will excel and what it shouldn't be bought for. So that grebe, I thought it would make a decent shot because I really liked the look of the water. Now a grebe is about, I would say, from end to end lengthwise, probably about maybe 25, 26 centimetres, something like that. They're very small birds. And that one was about, I would estimate, 60 yards away from me. So I was able to frame up my shot the way I wanted it in camera. And it's very small in the frame, but because I liked the look of the water, I thought it would make a decent shot. If that grebe was any further away, or if I had less focal length, say I only had 300 millimeters, it would have been simply too small in the frame. So because there was no heat haze, no atmospheric conditions, and I was able to go to 600 millimeters on this lens, I was able to get that shot, but I was really pushing it to its limits. So that worked for me. But what I think it displays as well, and I think it's a very common mistake some people who are newer to wildlife photography could make, is that they buy a lens like this, 600 millimeters. It's an extreme focal length at the maximum end offered by this lens. And they think they're going to be able to photograph fairly small birds at long distances, get them large in the frame, or with a small crop, get them large in the frame, and it's going to show plenty of detail and look fantastic. That is not what this lens should be bought for. You can't expect miracles. It's just not going to work. Where I think it excels is that it is going to let you get images the size you want in frame a lot of the time without disturbing wildlife. And we really don't want to disturb wildlife. We always need to put wildlife first. So I always see it as that there's an imaginary boundary. And if there's a subject that you're photographing, we'll say it's a small bird. It varies from bird to bird, from animal to animal, but there's always a boundary line. And if you cross that boundary line, you're either going to scare or disturb or unsettle your subject, and it's going to take off. We want to avoid that. And where I think this lens helps avoid that and benefits the photographer to get the image they want is because it goes to 600 millimeters, we can stay back a bit, not reach that boundary line, get the image that we want, leave the subject undisturbed and move on. That's where I think it really excels, having 600 millimeters. In this video, I'll be out on location a few times, but I'm going to be out on location a lot without filming video, just trying to get shots, testing the lens. And I've already noticed I can stay, a bit further back from really small birds. They're happily going about their business, and I can get the shots that I want. So I think that's where the lens will excel. And you should keep that in mind, I think, if you're interested in buying it. But I'll talk about what I'm out to do today. So I've came to the coast today to try out the lens a bit more. I'm primarily interested in trying to get some birds in flight and test out the autofocus. I always think the coast is quite a nice place to come when you're testing a camera and lens for the first time. There's plenty of subjects, so probably nothing too exotic, but there's plenty of seagulls, there could be pigeons, crows, maybe a raven, cormorants, that type of thing. This is not about getting portfolio quality award-winning images, it's just about getting a general feel for the autofocus on the lens. I think just shooting at the coast, taking lots of shots of birds in flight, seeing how it works, it's a good general test of the lens. I have this lens for a limited time. I have other obligations with my photography as well, other commitments in general life, so it's unrealistic that I'm able to go and test this and say golden eagles for the limited time I've got it. But I always think the coast is a pretty useful place to come. There's plenty of subjects and it lets you get a feel for how the lens is performing. I've been out now for, I would say, over 2 hours testing this lens on my OM1 Mark II, concentrating 99% of the time on birds in flight. As I say, not chasing portfolio shots, I'm trying to put in as much time with the lens that I can in the period that I've got it, so I can give an honest and accurate opinion and review on how the lens is performing for wildlife photography. It's quite challenging today. The sun is low in the sky, and you may get an idea of what I'm about to say from looking at the surroundings here in the video. Because the sun is low, there's a lot of areas along the cliff line here that are in shade, and then above the cliff line there is plenty of sunlight. The light is also changing. At times it's going behind cloud and so on. But as the birds are flying past, if they're in the bright areas, the sun is hitting them, and if they've got white feathers, they become incredibly bright. They can then dip down below the cliff line into the shade, so the exposure needs to change. Then they can come back up into the bright areas. They can also be flying in the sky, the background sky, and then they move along, and suddenly right behind them there is rocks. So there's a lot of things going on that can trick up a photographer and a camera and lens combination, so quite challenging at times. But I feel initial impressions, I feel that the autofocus is working well in conjunction with my OM1 Mark II, just as I would expect it to. What I would like to do is analyse all the shots I've taken today. I've just deliberately been concentrating on trying to take shots which I think will test the camera. So I'll have a look at those to see how many are in focus, judge their sharpness and so on. But on location, initial impressions are good. So yeah, I think it's been a worthwhile few hours out today, just getting a bit more time in with this lens. I'm back out again with the OM system 150 to 600mm lens. Just a very short video clip. I've spotted some roe deer in this field behind me here. There's a lot of dead wood, so I need to be very careful and not make noise, but I'm going to try and get closer to them and get a few shots, so we'll see what happens. I hope you enjoyed seeing that first section of the video where I was out on location with the OM system 150 to 600mm lens, giving it a really good test on my OM1 Mark II. I had the lens for a number of weeks. It's gone back now to OM system, but I really did spend a lot of time with it. I've got lots more images to show, and I've got a lot of things to talk about regarding the lens. I really wanted to get a really good feel for the lens, put in a lot of time with it out on location, so I could give a very realistic, honest impression of the lens throughout this video. At the end of the video, I'll sum up my thoughts on the lens, what I think of it, and try and help you decide if it's a lens that would be suitable or not for your wildlife photography. Regarding the images that I captured, they were all edited in Adobe Lightroom. Very simple, minimal editing, nothing drastic. The images are, not too far away from the raw files. And I think one or two saw their way to Photoshop. There was a couple of minor things that I wasn't quite happy with the results in Lightroom, so I did that in Photoshop. But very simple, minimal editing. What you see is what you get. They're very close to the raw files, just been edited for exposure and colour and so on. So we'll get on with the video and I'll share my thoughts on the 150 to 600mm lens. Before I move on to talk about things such as autofocus and image quality and so on, I want to give my general user experience impressions about the lens for the few weeks that I had it. In terms of build quality, when I first got it, it seemed very well made, and that has withheld over the duration that I've had it. My impressions haven't changed. I do think it's a very well made lens. Again, as I said on location, it seems really easy for me to hold and use. I really like the positioning of the zoom ring and the manual focus ring. I find them really easy to access and use, and I like how you're able to adjust the tension on the zoom ring. Regarding weight, the weight of the lens hasn't been a problem for me. In my past as a photographer, I'm used to handling much heavier full frame lenses. The 150 to 600 millimeter lens is just a hair over 2 kilograms. And if you look at something like a 600 millimeter f4 lens on a full frame system, I know it's a different lens, I know it's a different sensor size and so on. But just to give you an idea, if you can handhold those, which some people may be able to do, some people may struggle with, but generally they're a kilogram or more heavier than this lens. But on the other hand, if you've been using a Micro Four Thirds camera all your days and you've never tackled wildlife, and you've been using the very smallest, lightest lenses available for your Micro Four Thirds system, you may suddenly find, wow, this is quite a heavy lens. So it's totally up to you to decide regarding the weight. I can only sort of comment on my experiences over the few weeks that I had it, but I shot absolutely everything handheld with the lens, carried it on a strap. I didn't have any problem. I'm not saying I could hold it up aiming at a bird in a tree for 30 minutes or anything like that, but it's certainly fine for me. And I think considering the quality of the lens and the focal length range offered, I feel the weight is fair enough. Perhaps, you know, people who make these lenses will be able to make some advancements and maybe a future model will save some weight, who knows, but you really need to make your own mind up about that. I shot entirely handheld, as I said, and I got really good results. The image stabilization is quoted, I believe, as being up to 7 stops, which is quite a lot, and it worked incredibly well. I had no problems there. All I would say is that just be aware of how slow a shutter speed you try to go with this lens, because it is 600 millimeters. On a full frame system that would be 1200, so we can't go ridiculously low. But yeah, I got some sharp images shooting, you know, below 1/200th of a second, slower shutter speeds than that. But I would just be wary of how far I try to push the lens regarding image stabilization. But overall, my user experiences with the lens were great over the time that I had it. The next thing that I'd like to talk about is image quality. Keep in mind I was using the lens on my OM1 Mark II camera, and in terms of image quality, I think the lens is excellent. It produces fantastic images. The raw files, when I open them up in Lightroom, I really like the colour. I didn't need to do an awful lot of editing to them. The images are incredibly sharp and incredibly detailed. So for my needs, and I certainly think for most people, this lens will deliver all the quality that you could ever need. I'd be happy to print images from the camera and lens combination that I was using. I'm sure I could print them pretty big. I would be happy to sell prints. The image quality is excellent, no problems whatsoever. And a lot of people will be wondering, how sharp is the lens, fully zoomed in at 600 millimeters, at its widest available aperture at that focal length, which will be f6.3. And the lens that I had was producing fantastic sharp images at 600 millimeters f6.3. And I'll show you a couple of examples of that now. Now here's a picture of a robin. I think I took this on my first time out with the lens. I was taking a lot of shots, not because I thought they would create great photographs, but because they would be good test images. I was wanting to see right off the bat, how is this lens for image sharpness? So this robin was fairly close to me, 600mm f6.3, and if I zoom in and show you some of the detail on the robin where the camera focused on the bird's eye, you will see it is very sharp and it is very detailed. Keep in mind, for all the images you see throughout this video, unfortunately videos get compressed, and they get compressed by YouTube as well, so you're not going to see the full quality that I see on my own computer, but hopefully it will give you an idea just how good the image quality is from the 150 to 600mm lens. Here's another example, another very small bird taken considerably further away at 600mm f6.3, and if I zoom in, certainly on my computer, looking at the raw file, I can see tons of detail on this bird, tons of feather detail. I can even see small details around the bird's eye. So that should hopefully put any concerns about this lens not being sharp at 600mm f6.3 out the window. I was really impressed across the entire focal length range, and I think the lens helps produce lovely looking images. Related to image quality, there may be a few people watching this video who haven't used Micro Four Thirds cameras before, or perhaps have used them but haven't used them for wildlife photography, and they're wondering, what do images look like that were captured at really high ISO values? So I've got a few of those to show you. I'll put up on screen the ISO value that was used at the moment of capture. And as I said, these have only been processed in Lightroom, so they will have had a little bit of noise reduction applied. Now, how a high ISO image looks is more related to your camera's sensor than the lens. But obviously, as a general guideline, if you're using a lens and it offers wider aperture values such as say f2.8, you can keep the ISO down. So on this lens, if you're shooting in poor light and you need a reasonably fast shutter speed, you will have to bump up the ISO values to a certain level depending on the situation, what you're trying to do, are you trying to capture fast motion, and so on. So here's a few examples. They're generally higher ISO values than I would want to be using for wildlife photography, and I would generally be trying to keep it a bit lower than this, but hopefully you can see that the images with a little bit of noise reduction applied still look really good. So what about autofocus performance on the 150 to 600mm lens from OM System? You saw me out earlier in the video. I was testing it at the coast on birds in flight. Over the weeks that I've been using the lens, I've been out with it an awful lot, and I've been photographing birds on the ground, moving around in trees. I've been photographing deer, squirrels, otters, a number of different subjects in a number of different situations. And I felt the autofocus was really good. When I talk about it in relation to the lens, I'm really talking about the autofocus motors, their speed, their responsiveness. I consider the camera to be the driving force. It's got subject recognition, there's all those autofocus options that we can configure. So I'm really just talking about the lens in terms of the autofocus motors. and it's been really good. I've never really missed a shot because of it. It's been fast and responsive enough for all the wildlife photography that I've done. It's been really impressive. I think it would be fair to say that out of all the lenses available from OM system, it would not be top tier performance. So as an example, I haven't tried the 50 to 200mm f2.8, but simply because of the aperture and the design of that lens, I'm sure if you could measure the performance, it would be slightly better than the 150 to 600mm. That's just an example. So if that lens you could say was very top level, say 10 out of 10, I would give this one a 9. It would be slightly under it, but still very fast, very responsive, and more than fine for my wildlife photography. Other than image quality, one of the standout features of this lens for me has to be the focal length range that it offers. 150mm all the way up to 600mm, and one lens that you can carry around with you all day is absolutely fantastic. It is so useful in wildlife photography. I don't think I could overstate the importance of having that flexibility, that zoom range. It really is fantastic. Over the weeks that I've been using the lens, and this has been the case for all the years that I've done wildlife photography, at one moment I'm wanting to zoom in, 600mm photographing very small birds, and then suddenly there's something bigger and I need to zoom out. And a lens such as this allows you to do that. It was just the other week I was at 600mm photographing some small birds, and then not too far away from me, I got quite a surprise. Some deer appeared out of really long grass and bushes, so I needed to zoom out considerably to be able to get those shots, and I ended up getting some shots that I really liked within 5 minutes of some small birds and of course of the much larger deer. And a lens such as this makes that possible. If I had been shooting a prime lens for the small birds, it would have been much too long a focal length. If it was correct for the small birds, it would have been much too long a focal length for the deer. This is not a debate against zoom lenses versus primes for wildlife photography. I think they've got their place, both of them, for different situations. But for me personally, if I could only pick one, I would always take the zoom lens, and I think this one is fantastic. I'm going to give you some examples of that now. I was fortunate to watch an otter for about 40 minutes, and this lens really helped me capture a variety of shots. The focal length range, I really utilised it. So at times the otter was further from me and it was almost directly facing me or ever so slightly facing away, so I needed to use the much longer focal lengths. Then the otter was coming closer to me and it turned side on, so the profile became much bigger, so I had to zoom out considerably just to fit it within the frame. So I'll show you a number of those shots now. They were all taken at different focal lengths, and you'll see one of the images where the otter is side on. That was much further zoomed out. The images where you're just seeing the head and it's almost facing me were at much longer focal length. So I hope you enjoy these. I said earlier in the video while back on location that I own the OM System 150 to 400mm lens, and that one has got a built-in teleconverter, and I specifically said I didn't want to do a video comparing those two lenses because I thought it was an unfair comparison, and I just wanted to test the 150 to 600mm lens on its own merits. How do I find this lens? And I hope that's came across in this video. It's really focused on the 150 to 600mm lens rather than comparing it to the lens that I actually own. But I thought there'll be a few people interested, and it was interesting for me to actually just use this lens for a few weeks to see what I thought of it, having had the experience of the other lens. So if you are interested in a very brief overview of the differences, I'll try and sum that up now. Keep in mind that the 150 to 400mm lens is thousands of pounds more expensive. It's one of OM System's Pro lenses. It's got an internal zoom, it's got a teleconverter built in. There are a number of differences, but where I think people would see the difference between these two lenses, and in some cases you're going to need to look to see the difference, I think it comes in three areas. The first is, I would say, image quality. In my experience, I didn't compare them side by side, it's not something I wanted to do, but from all the months that I've owned the 150 to 400mm lens, I know it's a top level lens. It's got fantastic top level image quality, and I think it's just ahead of this lens. The 150 to 600mm, it is absolutely excellent. It's more than good enough for me. It's more than good enough for me to sell prints with. I love the image quality from the lens, but my own lens is just a hint better. The next area where I think people would see the difference is in the AF performance. It is minor, and I've not done a scientific test to compare them, but again, just based on experience, I would say my 150 to 400mm lens is ever so slightly quicker and more responsive when it comes to autofocus. We're not talking night and day differences between the two lenses with any of these things. It is just small differences. And the third area would obviously be the aperture. My lens offers f4.5, and that does pay dividends at certain times. However, the 150 to 600mm lens is absolutely fantastic, and if I was paying thousands of pounds more for the OM System Pro lens, the 150 to 400mm, these small differences are just what I would expect. That's why someone would pay all that extra money. There are differences, they're fairly minor in some cases, but based on non-scientific tests, that's a brief summary of my findings. In a minute, I'm going to sum up my final thoughts on the OM System 150 to 600mm lens. I'll let you know what I think of it, and if you've been pondering a purchase of this lens, I hope it will help you come to a decision either way if it's right for your wildlife photography. Just before I do that, if you are interested in purchasing this lens, I think now, depending on when you watch this video, could be an excellent time to get it at a much reduced price. So when this video goes live, and for a few days, OM System Winter Cashback will still be active. So this is running through until January the 6th, 2026. And the OM System 150 to 600mm lens is on offer for this period up until January the 6th at a £600 cashback. So that's an opportunity for you to buy the lens and save a lot of money. If you're interested in doing that, I'll have an affiliate link in the description of this video, and if you click on there, it will take you to the official OM System website and the page, which will give you all the information that you'll need. What then are my final thoughts on the OM System 150 to 600mm lens from a wildlife photography perspective? I think it is an absolutely fantastic lens. It's sharp, the image quality is excellent, the focal length range is just amazing. I can't overstress how useful that is to a wildlife photographer. It's going to let you capture a number of images that you may otherwise have missed, or the subject could have been too small in the frame. And as I talked about earlier in the video, I also think this lens at times will be of benefit to wildlife itself. It just lets us stay that bit further back. The subject is not disturbed and we can still get our shots. And yeah, that's something that's very important. Weight is something you need to consider. Is the weight fine for you? I can't make that choice for you, but I've tried to help with that as best I can. And I really think it's best for me to sum up my thoughts on the lens as follows, regarding if I can help you decide if it's the right lens for you. I'd like to talk about two different situations, two different types of photographers. So if you're someone that's really serious about wildlife photography, you want a really good quality lens, you want to take really nice looking high quality images, and you're trying to do all of that in one lens, but you mainly shoot when light levels are, I would say, fair to good. I think this lens would be absolutely ideal for you. It's the perfect lens. You're going to enjoy using it. You're going to capture some fantastic images. You'll be delighted with the image quality, and it's probably the only lens you will ever need. Moving on from that, if you're that same photographer, but in addition to that, you may be what I could describe as an extremely serious amateur wildlife photographer, or perhaps even a professional wildlife photographer, I still think this lens is absolutely excellent for you and you won't be disappointed with it at all. But chances are you may also be shooting in poorer light conditions when light levels are lower. So for example, if you shoot in woodlands, or you shoot a lot at the end of the day or the start of the day, this lens will still be excellent for you. It will be probably your most used lens. You'll find it incredibly versatile, but you will probably want to partner it with another OM system lens to use when light levels are lower. So for example, if you're in a quite dark woodland as I described. Which lens I would suggest adding to your kit alongside this one for those really poor light levels would be obviously your choice and dependent on your requirements. But some suggestions from OM system lenses would be, say, the 40 to 150 2.8, the 50 to 200mm 2.8, or even perhaps for some people the 300mm f4. I just think in very low light levels you would see the benefit of those lenses. But if you're shooting in fair to good light most of the time, which I think most of us are trying to do, then this lens will excel for your requirements, and you'll be delighted with the image quality and the versatility that it brings to your wildlife photography. That's going to be it for my review. I've spent many weeks trying to put this video together. I've been out on location for many days. I've spent too many days at my computer looking through images in Lightroom and doing a bit of editing, and yeah, the whole thing's taken quite a lot of time, but I really think it's been worth it. I've loved using the lens. I'm a little bit sad to put it back, to be honest. I've captured some images that I'm really pleased with, and I think most importantly I hope it will have helped a few people get an idea of this lens, find out some more information about it, and decide if it's right or not for their wildlife photography. I think putting in all that time has let me be incredibly honest about the lens, and I can speak about the lens really feeling that I'm certain of what I'm talking about. I've not just tried the lens for a couple of days and come up with a review, so I really do hope the time that I've spent will be useful to a few of you watching. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch through this video. I really do appreciate it. Good luck with your wildlife photography, and I hope you'll join me in my next video.